Hello. This is a brief overview of the human design system from its largest perspective down to its most finite detail. In this system of differentiation, so this is the science of, or the applied sciences of differentiation in humanity, with being able to look at multiple spectrums of which humans can present themselves and how they feel, how they respond, how much energy they have, we can start to understand how uniquely different we are so that we can appreciate our own individuality, so that we can love ourselves more, so that we can end up being of greater service. So the value in self-exploration is that it brings you into the wholeness of yourself so that you can be more effective in the world. Sort of from that top-down perspective, the first thing we start looking at is energy types. Energy types is an exploration of where and how we hold energy in our bodies and whether or not it is replicable, duplicable, and consistent or not. Some of us are not designed to have energy in a consistent way. Although society may tell us over and over again that we should dream it and go do it, that is not how many of the people in humanity have energy within themselves to do. And so this system can help, understanding this system can help one understand why they don't fit into the cultural stereotype of, well, you should be able to do this with your energy. Within energy types, there is 5 different main categories. Some would argue and say that there's only 4. I will be talking about them as though there is 5 because the differences between 2 of the types is extreme enough where they really should be studied for practical application sort of separately. Just to list them off from their most people are like this down to the least amount of percentages. The highest percentages would be the pure generators and the manifesting generators. Some would put that into one category and call it all generators. They do have different strategies and slightly different aspects of things, so I do study them differently. They make up about 70% of the world. Then you have projectors at around 20%, and you have manifestors at around 8 or 9%, and then you have reflectors at about 1 to 2%. So these different ranges of energy types let us study more specifically how we might be using our energy so we know how to use it more effectively. The next layer down would be strategy and authority. And so there's different centers within human design. If we're looking at a sort of full blank chart of what a human design body graph and mandala look like, this would be one of them. So you've got all the blank centers here. There's nothing filled in yet. So this is sort of like that blank model. And in through here, some of these centers, which are what these individual shapes are called, some of them are considered to be motors. And in those motors, you also have motors, authorities, and you also have awareness centers. Knowing where your authority comes from, where you are defined to be, and we'll talk about definition a little bit later, gives one an ability to be able to explore arriving at how they make decisions from a very precise way. And so it sets each person up with their own unique way of running an experiment to see if this brings more abundance, more contentment, more ease into their world. The next layer down would be profiles. Profiles are those numbers that run from 1 to 6. They can be found in the 2 little columns on either side of the human design chart. You've got your planets, and then you've got their gate number, and then you've got their line number. And so those lines are what the profiles are. You'll also see that up at the very top of the chart where it says like a 1-3 or a 2-4 or a 5-1. Those give the personality profile as it is based on the 2 top numbers on either side of those columns of numbers on a human design chart. It is the line from each one of those is what determines the general face-forward profile. It's the first thing you meet about a person. There's a lot of layers in there, so don't get hung up on it having to be just the one way. Just understand that it's an entry point. Each one of these things gives one an entry point to begin to explore and delve. Use the language and learn the language in so much as it is useful. Do not use it to peg yourself or another person or say, well, this is what you have to do. And my goodness, do not use it to hide behind. Do not say, well, this is what I am, and so therefore I can't do anything more. We can always be better. There is our best self that we reach for. I tend to avoid using the term higher self, highest self, because it's sort of hierarchical. Better to say my best self, because there are days when I can absolutely feel my worst self wanting to come forward, and if I sit for a moment, I can find my best or my better self. And so these systems help us to feel into what our best or better self might look like, so we can aim for that versus letting ourselves fall into that trap of, being a human grump all the time, or whichever way our particular flavor tends to flow. So that's the profile side. The next largest aspect is actually studying the centers. And that is the centers that are the shapes inside of this body graph here. This is an immense amount of information right here. To even delve really deep into channels and gates and planets and all that, I find some of the most value at really looking at the centers, understanding how they are in their defined state, understanding them, what they are in their open state, and understanding what they are in relationship with each other, as in what happens when an open-headed person walks into a room with a fully defined headed person. What happens between that exchange? It's really quite fascinating to discover how much wisdom and lessons we bring each other every day just by our own isness. And for me, when I get to delve into what is the different kinds of isnesses in the world, then it's like a game. It's a lot of fun. And it also helps me to understand why sometimes there is just conflict between two groups of people or two individuals, and also why there can be a deep synergy and a deep creativity that emerges. You can also find those sorts of interactions in lots of other places in the charts as well. And it's definitely in the centers where I find it to be a deep dive, but not so deep that you're lost in the nuanceical details, but deep enough where you can begin to have an appreciation and see what someone else is bringing to the table. See what you yourself as a value is bringing to the table. Our value is not only in our doing, it is also in our pure being, just our existence, what we bring to the table. Whether that's the quality of listening to someone's voice, whether that is being just in their presence. It might be how somebody looks at another and really cares and really looks to see beneath the surface. It might be in their ability to be solid and be unemotional despite what is going on and still be a rock. Each one of these things can be sort of characterized and classified into these different categories so we can understand. So when we're trying to put together things like rituals, teams, underground revolutions, however you name it, there is a sort of a blueprint to which you can say, okay, we need the ones who are going to be emotionally feeling and intuitive to help people ground into their emotions and feel validated. We also need the ones that are absolutely unshakable. We need the ones that are bringing ideas, and we need other ones that are taking in ideas and doing something with them and making them be something that is tangible. And not everybody can be all of those things. We each have our own lane to work in. All right, so that's centers. Channels is what connects centers. Channels is what each one of these lines are that connect each one of these centers together. So I can't really talk about channels without also talking about gates, because two gates coming together is what creates a channel between each center. The 64 gates of human design are spread between the 9 different centers. In that spread out, each center has its own category of gates that is what runs it, what fuels it, what rules it. And when both of two ends are established, then that lights up those centers and creates this circuitry that comes all the way across, thus giving you like a highway map system through your human design chart, assuming you're not a reflector. Reflector is an energy type. They don't have any definition whatsoever as far as centers and channels go. They just have individual gates that will be defined that light up and react to others when they encounter them. So channels are kind of like our highways of information. They are our constant lane. It's like, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to go analyze how to do something in a different way. If you've got an ajna defined, that might be a consistent for you. That gives you your ability to operate and function on a daily basis in a regular way. Another one might be, let's say you have a channel from your sacral definition to your G center. And so this is a constant access, a consistent access to being able to check in with your direction and see if you have enough energy within yourself to function in that direction. It doesn't necessarily say what you're going to do with it, that you're going to be able to analyze it, how you're going to feel about it, that you have the drive to complete it, just that you have the energy to put into it. So it's a very open-ended sort of way of being. It depends on which channel you've got, right? There's 64 gates and there is 36 channels, right? 2 gates equal a channel. So you got 64 over here and you got 36 over here. And that is what gives us our lanes. That's what I like to work with channels. I call them our lanes. When I step into the consistency between my channels on a daily basis, I find that I am far less distracted and scattered. I have a channel between my sacral and my G center, and I have 2 of them between my voice and my ajna. And so we haven't gotten into centers yet about each one of those. There will be another video that comes out with that one. So just bear with me as I give this overview. So yeah, and gates tell us about the electromagnetic that is what creates the channels, that is what lights up the centers, that is what gives us all of the above information. So gates become something about where your planets are in relationship to what keys and which ones are being activated. So around the outside of this mandala is all of the I Ching, right? These are the different gates in human design, or keys in gene keys. And you'll also notice that there is an astrology, the astrology signs, astrological signs, and their different varying degrees are also measured in there. And so when the human design data is put into the system, into the software, it calculates where everything lies, right? And that gives you the activation of all of the gates. And the gates, of course, determine whether or not channels are defined, which defines the centers. So you start to see the gates are one of the smallest little aspects that really does ripple out and affect the whole. A lot of people will get stuck in really just going for that plunge and understanding the gates. But I tell you what, unless you understand all of the other layers, you don't really understand how the gates are impacting them. Right? So I really recommend studying it from the top down. Understand the energy types and the strategy and authority, the profiles and the centers before you really start diving into the gates and the channels aspect of things. Because what happens is your mind gets lost in the minutia and you just don't have a grounding in how do I then make this applicable. It becomes head knowledge rather than experiential understandings that happen in the body. One of the last dynamics that I work with within human design is the Incarnation Cross. Incarnation Cross takes 4 of the gates that are being defined as it presents as a cross in your chart, and it gives you sort of like what is your karmic path in life. It is the thing that is the double-edged sword. It is both a gift and a curse. It is both the thing that will like really just drive you to frustration over and over again. And it can also be the thing that is the biggest gift to your community, to your families, to your offering to the world. And when you can kind of come to terms with what that is for you and really begin to study that and how that shows up in your life in very varying different nuanceical ways, it becomes much more applicable. And it's the Incarnation Cross where I dot on over to Gene Keys, because that Incarnation Cross is also the activation sequence, which is your genius. That's the outer sphere of circles or spheres in the Gene Key chart. And so whatever that is for you in your Incarnation Cross in human design, it is also the same in the outer ring of Gene Keys. And so that starts to jump that understanding from an understanding of a mechanical process into spectrums of consciousness, spectrums of understanding and ways of being with things. And so that's when we start to look at shadow, gift, and essence as a 3-factor variable with each one of the 64 I Ching, which is also the gates and keys. Gates of human design, keys of Gene Keys. You'll notice I'm starting to merge those two languages together, because to me, those two systems are really two sides of the same coin. One is looking at it in a mechanical way to understand its process, and the other is looking at it as a form of contemplation and really allowing the use of words in unlocking conditioning to enter into our consciousness to help unweave and unwire us from previous ways of being. So for example, let's give us something a little more concrete here. Let's say you have an unrelenting fear, and you have spent your entire life trying to figure out where this particular fear comes from. And you get into human design and you're like, oh, wow, I got an open spleen. Okay, so that means I have this like wide open experience of what survival is. And I'm constantly being bombarded with the things that could make me be unsafe. You know, whether that is rapid intrusive thoughts, whether that is a body awareness that just every day feels weird or feels wrong, or you feel wrong in the world. And you're like, okay, I understand that on a mechanical level now. On a certain way, I pick up so much and I don't have a consistent way of processing it. So it's just an overload for my system. I am perpetually overloaded. And so that's a way of understanding that on a mechanical level. Now you take that same concept of fear and you go over to Gene Keys, and anywhere you end up starting reading with working with your chart, fear is one of the primary ones that gets brought up. Fear is an alarm clock. Fear is a warning system. It is, do something about this, or heads up, this could happen. The thing is you gotta shut off the alarm clock before you go to try to do something about it. If you just try to go through your day without calming the inner alarm clock that's going off inside your body, you're going to feel like you got Tourette's. You're going to be, like, okay, I got to sit down, I got to do this. And your whole reality becomes more than you can handle. And life really becomes only about your own reality. And so you're cut off from being able to sense other people's realities, being able to be more intuitive. Even if you are highly intuitive, you're so reactive to your own reactions of all of that overload that you don't really have the bandwidth to interpret what might be going on for someone else. You're only interpreting based on what's happening in your body and your relationship with your own discomfort. So there we start to see fear as not so much a shadow, but rather our lack of response that helps us ground out of that fear is our shadow. The shadow that keeps us spinning. The shadow that says, oh, I can't do anything about it. It wrings its hands and it wails, or it's very stoic. And it's just deadpan. Right? There's spectrums to how we react and how we respond to something as simple and basic like fear. And so on one hand, with human design, we can look at our fear and understand it in a mechanical way. And then on the other hand, we can go over here and we can look at fear through the eyes of Gene Keys and spectral analysis of shadow, gift, and essence, and we can embrace it. We can rise through it because we understand where the pathway goes. So if over on the Gene Keys side of things, if fear is an element of the thing that we're studying, we get to see that the shadow is what we are. Our shadow aspects are the running and the avoiding that we do of having to deal with the fear. When we deal with that, when we do the things that bring us to our best self, like a daily practice, like regular check-ins, like journaling, like playing music, like going for a walk, like having a morning ceremony, you name it, right? I live a very simple life here on a mountain, and oftentimes that is as simple as going and opening up the door for the birds and feeding the birds in the morning, or going out and harvesting morning dew for a ceremony that I'm doing, or it's going out and it's melting snow for a particular reason, maybe for it's my ice bottle, right? So these very simple practices where you calm your mind, you center yourself, and you go about the task. It's like getting behind that energy of fear. You've shut the alarm clock off of the fear. Take a deep breath. I'm good. You go do the thing, and now you are in this wonderment. You know, life is exciting. You've gone outside and you're like, wow, it's a really beautiful day. It's the middle of winter, and everything's icy and crystally and shiny, and then you listen and you hear the cracks of ice and snow melting and shifting. You hear the crunch of the ground underneath you as the frozen, heaved soil gives way under your boots. And you listen to the birds who have wintered here in this area with us as they're talking back and forth. And there's all of a sudden a contentment inside and an awareness outside of you. And what has happened is you have risen to your gift. You have gone through the shadow. You've gone down into that shadow, right? And you've passed through it. You've let fear pass through you. And now you are working with the gift that you have. Whichever one that is, right? You got 64 different ones that show up in the gene key system, and each one of us has 11 of them or so face front in our gene key chart. And then there's also the programming partners. So there's lots of variability in there. And the essence is a really unique piece, because the essence is kind of what comes up underneath and supports everything. The essence is not necessarily a thing that you're aiming to obtain. It is sort of the essence of the embodiment of what happens when you work through that dynamic. I also like to look at it a little bit as though the essence is the energy that existed before it was in flesh form. And so that essence came here to earth to experience being human. The being human aspect is part of that shadow. And so we're not trying to get away from being human. We're just trying to work with that process and work through it to be able to bring our gifts into the world. And we do so by understanding what the essence brought us. We can also, this is a fun way of reverse engineering for deeper understanding. If you let the essence look backwards on the shadow, it's a really interesting thing, because imagine the grump of an essence of having to come into corporeal form and being rigid locked into this body. While it wanted that, when it lands here, it sort of forgets that. It's in a body that has forgotten it, and so therefore it has a harder time trying to do its mission. And so there's this interesting undercurrent where it's like, okay, right, I'm really getting to come to terms with this skin bag, flesh castle that I'm living in, while also having a spirit that lives inside of me that I don't always have a conscious awareness of unless I am focused on it. And even when I am focused on it, I still have this vessel that feels very much alive. It's like having multiple personalities existing in your head simultaneously, right? No matter who you are, we've got this, not only a duality, but a multiplicity that exists within inside of each of us. And so being able to study the human design and gene key, what I call the human design gene key kind of hybrid, because they kind of zipper together for me to create a whole way of seeing things. I walk very much that middle path where I need both the experimentation and the contemplation. I need to go out there and feel it and do it for myself. And I also need to sit back and just understand and let the understanding wash through me And when my body lights up in a certain way, I go, that piece is true for me. And it's not a thinking thing that happens. And it's very tricky to think without thinking, to listen without trying to think of the answer, to ask a question without immediately searching and trying to grab for an answer. Working within these systems kind of teaches you that process of how to do that and gives you lots of beautiful examples along the way. All right, that's it for this overview. See you again soon. My name is Rainey Ford. I'm an herbalist and inner cartographer, founder of Nemeton and Mountain Woman Medicine. If you are interested in purchasing herbal medicines or discovering your inner mapping, please visit my website in the description below. Have a wonderful day, beautifuls.